Hello, everyone. It's Francis Whittleson here. Today, I'm going to discuss the situation surrounding Charlene Bellow, Chief Charlene Bellow, who was invited by the University of British Columbia to give a talk on poise, something about poise and reconciliation in an era of rage. And Derek Thompson was the administrator who had invited Bellow to be in this interview. And I heard about this and I was really excited to see Charlene Bellow because when I was doing the documentary, the footage for the documentary with Simon Harrogott at Thompson Rivers, and we'd done quite a segment on Charlene Bellow already. Who was there at Thompson Rivers but Charlene Bellow, and she came up and accosted me, and we had this interaction. So I had a feeling that Bellow was going to talk about me in this interview, but I had no idea what was going to unfold. And what unfolded was that Bellow, when she was talking about our interaction at Thompson Rivers, which I also have footage of, which I have posted on this wokeacademy.info site, when she accosted me, I asked her about her relative, who she's very upset about what happened to her relative, her supposed relative, her alleged relative, whether it was her grandfather or uncle, because she'd said different things at different times. In fact, she's called this person her grandfather, her uncle, her great uncle, and her great grandfather. Anyway, she got really incensed about this and stormed off. And she didn't mention that in this discussion, but when she was talking about it, she's still very angry about what occurred. And she said that she wished that I would be dragged into the basement of the Kamloops Indian Residential School and have the Aboriginal language spoken to me, and that I be beaten and raped in the basement of this school. And when I heard this, I could not believe what she had said. I could not believe anyone would say anything like that. And so this then led me to do all sorts of clips of Charlene Bellow, which I've posted some of them on the wokeacademy.info site, just showing what Charlene Bellow has been up to since 1993. And so there's a whole bunch of things that have happened which show, in my opinion, that Charlene Bellow is a masterclass manipulator. She's using emotions of people to manipulate them. And the reason why I think she's manipulating people and is not an innocent party is because of her constant changing of her story and her use of the story as a different thing in different contexts. So it's an interesting question as to whether this is intentional or unintentional, and she just is not competent and is misremembering. It's not 100% clear, but the act that she puts on in different contexts, and she's been in leadership positions in many different organizations. So she's not someone who just came in from the community. She's been doing a lot of different activities. So what I wanted to do is to talk about the case of Charlene Bellow, which I find is fascinating. I wanted to share my screen with you so we can take a look at this post that I have put on the wokeacademy.info site, which has a whole bunch of clips and other materials that will help us to understand the Charlene Bellow case much better. Okay, so here we have the Charlene Bellow post, the post about Chief Charlene Bellow. And the subtitle is Lies or Misremembering. And this is a very important question because we always have to consider that there's misremembering that is happening, which is people can implant memories in how people are thinking about the past. It's very, very common. And this is the case, especially if people are mentally disturbed, or if they're a person who tends to be kind of susceptible. And we have a range of possibilities. Some people are pathological liars. Some people are trained researchers. If you're a trained researcher, you're less susceptible to misremembering than if you're someone who's mentally ill. And in the case of Aboriginal people, what you have too is this idea that there is your truth. There's a different kind of truth that Aboriginal people have. And this makes people ripe for misremembering, because you're not like looking at things objectively. You're just think that truth is whatever you believe to be true. And that is a very dangerous thing, for having someone recount things and then the demand that people must believe what they're talking about, which often happens in the case of Aboriginal people. So here we have Charlene Bellow. She's giving a talk at the Special Interlocutor Gathering, and here she's talking about Grandpa. Grandpa, and this changes. Now, of course, as well, we're going to see that the person who she thinks is her relative supposedly died when he was 9 years old. So that's a bit of a mystery as to why Charlene Bellow would think that it would be her grandfather, because in order for it to be her grandfather, he would have had to have children, her mother or her father. So how could he then have died when he was 9 years old? So that's very mysterious as to why she would say he was grandfather. Anyway, we'll get to that session shortly. But first of all, we want to get into Charlene Bellow's comments that she made on April 14th, 2026. She was invited by UBC to speak. And I think we should listen to this whole thing just so that people get a sense of what Bellow is talking about.
I've had a chance to just read different people's views on denialism, and people like Sean Carlton and other people within the academic field, and on what they see as denialism and what they think they should do about it. I'm different, I think, because of my experience and my expectations as a survivor is that people need to speak up for us. I go back to my earlier story where my uncle committed suicide there. You know.
So that was her uncle committing suicide. This is going to be important for later.
I didn't think that anybody at TRU, for example, because they were Widdowson and company and Brody came to TRU.
That's Thompson Rivers University.
And I phoned down to the people that the chancellor and advisor at TRU.
She phoned the chancellor and the advisor at TRU. The chancellor is Didi DeRose, who's another highly problematic figure, keeps on making false claims about the 215. And the advisor could have been Ted Godfreyson Jr. So there's collusion happening between Bellow and the administration at Thompson Rivers University.
To come and meet with them. So I went to meet with them and I said, I'm going down to where they are. And they were concerned for my safety.
They were concerned for her safety.
An elder. But also I felt the need for me to say something if nobody was going to say anything, and I did. So basically what I did was, and what they offered and I accepted was for them to send security with me to make sure that I was safe.
Sure she was safe.
So I went down to where Brody and Widdowson were, and I basically walked up to her and I just said who I was. And of course she knew who I was because she's followed me for years, or she's probably researched me to death, and that's fine.
I sure have. I've researched her a lot.
Fine. But I basically told her my story about my uncle. And I told her that this is the truth. You can read it in the books. It's researched. You know, it's real. And you are hurting our people. I was really angry. I was really angry with her. But I expressed my anger to her right there, and her cameras were there. She's made a documentary, as a part of that. I doubt that I'm in that documentary, not that I've watched it or.
The documentary hasn't been completed yet. There's What Remains, which was the previous documentary, but that doesn't talk about Charlene.
Neither do I want to. But I basically told her, what you're doing is not right. You're hurting our people. You're hurting the survivors. You're hurting the elders. And stop. I told her, I wish that our people could grab you, drag you over to the Kamloops Residential School, put you into the basement, speak our language to you, nothing but Sequemo, beat you, rape you, hurt you.
Beat you, rape you, and hurt you. She wishes that her people would do this to me. That's amazing. And as well, like, how does Charlene Bellow think that I'm hurting people? Like, if children have not been murdered and put in a mass grave, to let them know that this is an improbable hypothesis, how's that hurting them? So this again is a very strange thing being argued.
And maybe you'd understand what our people went through. Mm-hmm. She never said anything to me or never responded to any of that, and I didn't expect her to.
That's not true, as we'll see shortly.
But I really needed to let her know that this is how I feel, and that I'm going to stand up for our people. So after I finished that, there was a lady that had her drum there, and I asked her to just lend me her drum so I could sing a song for my uncle. And I started drumming, and that's when people were able to rally, the students that were there and the public that were there, to stand with me, so that they didn't have to hear what she had to say.
So people don't have to hear what I have to say. That's the kind of the constant drumming, which stops you from being able to communicate. And so that's what Derek Thompson, you can hear him in the background. He's the administrator. He's just nodding and saying, oh, yeah, you want to rape her and hurt her and beat her. Yeah, yeah. That's what he's saying. That's what's happening at the University of British Columbia, which I'm going to get to shortly. And so this is what she's referring to, is what happened on November 12th. And I showed up there with my cinematographer, Simon Hergott, and we asked Bellow about a relative had died, whether it's a grandfather or uncle. And anyway, we want to listen to this, but I should mention that this research that I'm drawing this pose from comes almost exclusively from the incredible researcher Nina Green. Nina Green should get all the credit for this. She's the one who brought people together, and she was giving us all the time these constant tidbits about Bellow. So anyway, so let's take a look at what happened at Thompson Rivers University, which I find is fascinating. Oh, it's Charlene Bellow. So I was really surprised to see Charlene there. I was not expecting that at all. That was incredible.
I wanted to let you know that I am a residential survivor. Yeah. For 4 years at St. Joseph's Mission.
Yes, I know. I saw you at Quesnel. So Charlene Bellow gave a talk at Quesnel. I was there defending Pat Morton, the mayor's wife, who was being persecuted.
Okay.
And we've been covering your case, actually, because it's true that you were part of the task force with Jerry Peters.
Yes.
We've also interviewed Jerry Peters, so and he talked a lot about Charlene Bellow, and that happened in the 1990s.
I'm more interested in letting you know that I had an uncle that committed suicide at St. Joseph's Mission.
I heard you say that in Quesnel.
And if you read books, then read Victims of Benevolence. It's all documented, and it's there that he died. Like,
sorry, was it your uncle or your grandfather?
So that's Simon. He's piping out there, uncle or grandmother. That kind of, I'm glad he did that, because I might have forgotten to go after her about that.
My uncle. I want one question.
Okay,
I'm not here to talk to you.
Okay.
It was my uncle.
It was her uncle. She said uncle here.
So if you want to talk to somebody that has had a family member die, there, my family did. If you want to,
So this is all relevant. the fact that people died at a residential school doesn't change anything about the clandestine burial claim. So this is all just a red herring anyway.
Talk to somebody that's been buried there. My family's buried there, where nobody knows where he is. Like it's so, you are so hurtful to people like my family that lost somebody there.
Are you aware of your testimony at the 1993 Royal Commission?
I'm not sure.
And I want to talk to her about that too. This is the Royal Commission testimony in 1993, where she never said anything about any of this at that time. And I'll get to that shortly.
Talk about that. I just want you to know how painful all of this is and how you are denying what happened to my uncle. But damn, I wish I could take you over to the residential school. I wish I could take you downstairs, talk to you just in our language, make you starve for a little while, hit you a little, like stop hurting our elders.
So she didn't say rape in this instance. It's just hitting and starve you.
Stop hurting our survivors.
Okay, but you said at one point that it was your grandfather, and one point it was your uncle. Is it your uncle or is it your grandfather?
It doesn't matter.
You said it was your grandfather.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Uncle or grandfather.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
You don't.
I just lost a member.
Okay,
And I ain't gonna, if you're concerned, go about your job and get proper government funding for these things to be investigated and properly.
She wants me to get funding to go and investigate these things properly.
They had $12.1 million that went there. Why aren't they excavating?
I'm not here to further I want you to know I lost family there.
I heard your presentation now, and it's either your grandfather or your uncle.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter whether it's your uncle or your grandmother.
In my mind, uncle, grandpa.
And then you said your mother had a great experience at the residential schools in 1993.
Yeah, sure, she did.
Okay.
Her experience is different than mine.
So, but you weren't saying anything about your uncle or your grandfather in 1993.
She couldn't talk back then. I can talk today.
But your story in
I can talk today.
Well, look,
Getting a bit angry there.
I'm fucking mad.
but your view in 1993 was completely different than what it is now.
Fucking life.
Well, you
help me find my uncle.
You're coming up and talking to me.
Bullshitting.
You're coming and talking to me. I didn't go find you.
Bullshitting.
You came and found me, and you have said very, very different stories at different times. So you're not a reliable witness. Charlene Bellow. That's amazing.
Yeah, we were both amazed to see Charlene Bellow.
We're doing a story on her. We got part of our documentaries on Charlene Bellow. She says her grandfather at one time. She says her uncle at another. She testified at the Royal Commission in 1993, saying her mother had a great experience at the residential schools, and she had a great experience. And she was the chief liaison with Jerry Peters in the RCMP investigation that went on for several years, that never had any bodies that were talked about or no graves were mentioned in that case. Wow, that's amazing. That was Charlene Bellow.
That was incredible. I'm still find that amazing. And we both did, both Simon and me. Anyway, so then we go through some of the clips about the so she says sometimes grandfather, sometimes uncle. So she was saying uncle for the UBC thing, but here she talks about grandfather.
I've been able to have the list of many survivors and victims to be able to let me know what their stories were and when I was there. I know
this 215 comes up all the time in these discussions.
that he attended residential school in the early 1900s. And in the early 1900s is when we know from our own Alki Residential School inquiry that there was a lot of what they called flogging, where they would hang the children on posts and beat them until they passed out.
Hang children on posts and beat them until they passed out. This is another, this sounds highly implausible, that scenario.
That's a term that's a process that I came to understand through reading documents later that came from Europe, where you just flog the children and beat them, to listen. So I know that in the early 1900s it was common at our residential school. But I also know that that's what my grandpa went through. He committed suicide in 1920. There was a group of them that agreed that they would all die together, but he was the only one that died. The others survived. They ate poisonous hemlock and died. But in the process, to me, what is so disturbing about all of it is that they never let my family know. They just buried him there. And I know because, again, our family wrote letters to Indian Affairs to ask for our other relative to be released from there in case he might die too. So those are parts of government record. If you go back in records, it's the letter is there. And so that was in the 1920s. And I didn't go to residential school until the 60s. So my mom never talked about what happened to Grandpa. And
my mom never talked about what happened to Grandpa. So, Charlene, it's kind of an interesting question. How does she know that this is her relative? What on what basis is she making this claim?
She was very Catholic and probably was afraid to speak about it. I only found out about it when I was working with the Caribou Tribal Council and doing research on St. Joseph's Mission, where our chiefs asked for research to be done. Okay, we've got the residential school. What happened there? How did the residential school come to be? So we had a researcher document on St. Joseph's Mission, and in her research was able to identify numerous incidences of tragic deaths in the school, and one of them was Grandpa.
And so this is one version that we hear about the story. And then we see, and that was like after 2021, because we saw the 215 claim there. I don't exactly know where this came from, some kind of survivors gathering. But in 2014, we had the TRC and these documents, right? And I'm talking about Augustine Allen. So her supposed uncle or grandfather was named Augustine Allen. This is a suicide pact. And then she refers to him as her great uncle in this instance. So that is a changed story. And then in 2023 at the special interlocutor gathering, she's back to Grandpa. And she's talking to the audience about this suicide pact, and she's searching for her grandpa's burial site, but no one seems to kind of put together that this is Augustine Allen was 9 years old, and so how he can be a grandpa is not possible. And then she's going to go in the empty chair to speak to my grandpa and sing a song, so he knows I haven't forgotten him. So all these kind of manipulative tactics are being used. And then we have this question of the poles, hung on poles and lashed until they passed out. How do we know this? What is the evidence for this? This is something that would have to be looked at. That seems like it's an improbable scenario.
My family attended residential school. My uncle committed suicide there in 1920. I should have brought the book. So if you want to read The Truth, Victims of Benevolence, authored by Dr. Elizabeth Furness, researched.
So Bellow keeps on bringing up Elizabeth Furness's Victims of Benevolence. And that'd be an interesting book to look at as to what is actually in that book, what she's taking as evidence.
What happened to our children, and documented in detail how they died. There was a nun that was looking after the children that gave a detailed account of how my uncle died.
So that's her uncle. So we're back to uncle. And this was in Quesnel. So for people who are unaware about the Quesnel story, Pat Morton, who is the mayor's wife, was castigated and denounced for sharing the book with a friend. And I was asked to go to Quesnel to support Pat and to give, ask questions myself, which I did. And that was another interesting story in its own right. And there I saw Charlene Bellow giving this talk, but I hadn't put two and two together. I didn't even know it was Charlene Bellow at the time. But Nina Green, of course, again, with her incredible research, she pointed this out about Bellow.
Because he was not considered Catholic, suicide is not Catholic, they buried him somewhere on St. Joseph's Mission grounds. And this is where we buried them. I look forward to them finding my uncle, bringing him home, to be able to bury him with a level of respect that he should have had as a child.
And so she doesn't even know this person. Like, this is a interesting thing to point out. She found out after the fact that this was supposedly her relative. So why is she getting so emotional about something that she doesn't even know this person? She didn't even know that he was her relative until, quite recently.
He committed suicide because they were hanging them on wooden poles and lashing them until they passed out.
I call bullshit on that. I'd like to see the evidence for that. That seems highly implausible. I know that children were strapped, and sometimes we have Robert McBain as an account of a child which had welts on his body. So there were beatings that did happen, but putting on poles and stuff, that sounds like an odd thing to be happening. Okay, so that was the uncle, grandfather, great uncle, great grandfather. We're going to see great grandfather come up, at the end. But the other thing I was interested in probing was Charlene Bellow's experience, her experience of the residential school and what she said about it. And you can see this in March 9th, 1993. This was the Aboriginal People's Royal Commission. And there's a transcript of this, of her testimony. And you have Bellow, who is giving this. And she says about her mother that the residential schools was a very positive experience for her. And so there's no discussion about the uncle or the grandfather or anything like that and terrible things that have been done there. And Bellow as well says her own experience was positive. So my own experience at the residential schools was positive. And so we don't hear anything about the children being beaten on poles or all these other kind of abuses that she's talking about. It was a positive experience for her. So, and she talks about loss of language and things like that, which she finds is tragic. But that's again, this was to some extent due to pre-literate cultures meeting with modern nation states. So, this kind of emphasis that's put on that, and that's really not the same thing as children being really severely beaten on poles and, her grandfather or uncle being buried where she doesn't know where the burial is, those kinds of things. And even if it were true that this is the case, it has nothing to do with the Kamloops case. She's bringing in her own problems and so on, but that's not got to do with the clandestine burials at Kamloops. And in terms of who Bellow is, it's important to point out she's not just an innocent person. Like Aaron Pete was kind of mentioning this a bit. You'll see shortly that Steve Paikin of TVO sort of thinks her. She's an elder. She's been at these kind of Aboriginal industry initiatives for decades. And the first kind of movement into this was when she became involved in this task force with Jerry Peters. There's Jerry Peters on the left. There's Charlene Bellow. And this is what they do. They investigated sexual abuse claims. That's what this was about in the task force. They did find one kind of case of unmarked burials reference to that. That was Cooper Island. That was investigated and nothing was substantiated, but nothing about the Kamloops Indian Residential School was talked about in this task force. And because Bellow was involved, she was encouraging people to come forward. You would have expected to hear something about these unmarked graves if this had been within the culture at the time. And after she did her stint with the RCMP as this community liaison, she then began to work for the Assembly of First Nations. And there's mention of her in this report that was done for dispute resolution for the Indian residential schools. And you note that in terms of the people involved in this, the expert group, she's the second person on the list, which is survivor and coordinator, the AFN residential school unit. So she has been involved in these kinds of accusations for decades, 20 years. And talks about how her experience to the Assembly of First Nations as director of the Indian residential school unit. So she's not someone who has nothing to do, has no skin in the game with respect to these kinds of claims. And then, not very long afterwards, so 5 years after that, she was at a Truth and Reconciliation event in 2010. And this is incredible to see Charlene.
I want to show another piece of tape here from one that you did in your hometown of Winnipeg. I guess this was almost a year ago.
Our first national event.
And this is the then Indian Affairs Minister, Chuck Strahl, listening to the story of one of the survivors. And it's, I suspect people have not seen this tape before, so I'm really glad they're going to get to see it right now. Michael, if you would, roll tape.
To thank you for taking time to listen, and I don't want to apologize.
Is that acting? This is a completely different. She's sort of pretending that she has no voice and she's this person who's being silenced.
For being emotional, because we've been at this for 30 years. We've been asking to be heard for 30 years. We don't have a voice. We can start.
Don't have a voice. She's had like a huge voice in a whole bunch of different contexts.
Breathing again. We can start living again.
To make sure that we do.
That's Chuck Strahl, Minister of Indian Affairs at that time.
Everything we can to make sure that the record is complete, that we turn over every rock, that we make every supreme effort to make sure that we get that kind of information and that we work together so that we can, that you can get some peace.
Her hand on his back is just unbelievable. Wasn't that amazing?
Oh, so this to me is the most damning piece of evidence. For her to be acting like that when she's been involved in so many of these different contexts, why is she getting so emotional and claiming she doesn't have a voice? And of course, this has the emotional type of effect on people like Chuck Strahl.
Amazing. Talk to us about the importance of moments like that.
Well, Minister Strahl, of course, was a leader in our community, and at that time was the Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs. And his presence in the circle with the survivors who were speaking was an important gesture on his part.
So the survivors, she's had a good experience in 1993, she was saying. Why is she a survivor? So that's another thing, is that change that happened between 1993 and 2010, going through the AFN with all the legal settlements and the compensation that was going to be paid. Anyway, that is a fascinating. And then we have Bellow when the Kamloops discovery happened. It was July 20th, 2021. This is when she gets again appointed as a liaison person to deal with the unmarked grave search.
Thank you, Minister Rankin, for this important announcement, and to really underscore and emphasize the principles of self-determination, and to let the nations guide that work. And when you mentioned Charlene, to have someone with such a tremendous depth of knowledge and leadership. For former chief, he roles and supporter of residential schools. Lift up the nations right now.
Wade Chochwaidep. Spew a Isikusin Nachan. Charlene Belleau and Squex. Eagle Star Woman is my name. I'm from Eskedam, from Alkali Lake. I want to thank the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for allowing us to do this important work today. I attended St. Joseph's Mission Indian Residential School in Williams Lake. We've waited for this day for a long time.
What is they waited for?
My own great-grandfather
My own great-grandfather.
committed suicide at St. Joseph's Mission Residential School.
So there we have it. The great-grandfather now was not a reliable witness. Anyway, so that was Bellow. She's an activist. We understand what she's doing. She's probably a manipulator, but maybe she believes the kind of stuff she's saying. It's hard to know, but it seems to be very manipulative, what she gets involved with, and her kind of aggressiveness is very alarming as well. But the biggest problem is the University of British Columbia. And this guy, Derek Thompson, who's the administrator, who, is encouraging Bellow in her kind of wishing that I be raped and beaten. And then he talks about the 215.
And as that was unfolding in January, I kept thinking about, as you mentioned,
So that's the January event that Dallas Brody, Jim McMurtry, and I went to at UBC, where we had an angry mob of about 1,000 people who attacked us.
Focus, right? So they're focused on the 215 grave sites. Where are the graves? Meanwhile, there's an equal, and I think more important focus. There are 215 families who can't account for those children.
Nonsense. This is not true. UBC, you are fomenting misinformation to people. You must retract this statement done by your administrator. There are no 215 families who are looking for children. This is an unbelievable claim, and you need to take responsibility for these false claims that your administrators are putting out there. That is completely unacceptable today when we're coming up to the 5th anniversary. You will be held to account, you embarrassment of an institution. And then finally, the scariest thing of them all was Thompson talking about how the Musqueam should vet who comes on campus. This is another shocking episode.
That's really important, and I think there's another tension there that if you listen to UBC, almost every day you'll hear some reference from UBC acknowledging the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam people. So they uphold this so-called relationship between UBC and Musqueam, which they should. But as that event was unfolding, I was thinking, well, did UBC meet with Musqueam?
Did they meet with Musqueam? And they should have this relationship which is, censorship.
And did they ask Musqueam, hey, is it okay if we invite one BC to protest on your territory?
First of all, it wasn't 1BC. I'm not aligned with 1BC. So I want everyone to know that. I admire Dallas Brody immensely because of her courage and her honesty. But, I'm an Orwellian socialist, so I don't have the same ideas about, capitalism and the benefits of capitalism. And I'm happy to cooperate with people on this issue. That's the first thing. Number two, in terms of the protest, we weren't protesting. We were being protested against. We were coming there to try to correct the false information about the Kamloops 215 deception that UBC has been actively engaged in for the last almost 5 years. And now we're in April, a month away from the 5th anniversary. This is completely unacceptable.
And if they did, I'm pretty sure Musqueam would say, no, not going to happen. right? So there's also this tension about what's the purpose of this relationship building, this reconciliation.
Well, obviously, to give the Musqueam veto over who is able to speak and what they're able to say on campus. This is indigenization and decolonization. That's what it's all about. Stopping views that the Aboriginal activists don't like from being expressed on campus. And this is something that's got to be taken really seriously. If we want academic institutions, we cannot have this kind of pandering happening. And so what I've done is that what University of British Columbia, this is the alarming thing. Bellow, she's a chief. She's going to do kind of these ridiculous things because she's being pandered to. But the University of British Columbia is an academic institution. And what it has done, it has opened us up for detestation and vilification. And it's even possible that, it's more likely that violence is going to be meted out against us because what the University of British Columbia has done. Crazy. This is completely crazy. And we are coming now to the point where we're coming up to the 5th anniversary. I have the other segment of the countdown that I have put a post on, but I haven't done a video on that yet. I'm continuing to do that because we must have a reckoning about Kamloops. There's been all these institutions, including the University of British Columbia, that have been spreading this false claim. And as a result of that, a whole bunch of other policies unfolded that have had very, very negative implications for both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People being one. But there's generally been a climate that Canada committed genocide against the Indigenous population. This has resulted in everyone being overly deferential to all these claims are being made. And as a result of that, we are developing policy that is not beneficial. And for people who think that this is in the interests of Aboriginal people, you need to think very carefully about this. What you are doing is you're acting to isolate Aboriginal people from the modern world by putting them under the thumb of these tyrants that we see like Charlene Bellow. And what we need is we need to have Aboriginal people who are marginalized, not the integrated people like Bellow, who gets along very well in modern society, is probably quite wealthy, in fact, but the marginalized people, the people who are suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome in the communities, is the money needs to get to them. The services need to get to them. And that's not happening right now. So in order for that to happen, we must have truth about these various areas. The Kamloops claim is one of those specific details where it's not complicated. It's just a factual claim. We must have truth, starting with Kamloops, and this will enable us to have a better understanding of how to improve the lives of both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people.